Hey guys, welcome back to IGN's History of Awesome, a year-by-year breakdown of big events that shape pop culture. Today, we're covering 1987, a super important year for the Nintendo Entertainment System. This was the year that gave us Zelda, Metroid, Kid Icarus, Contra, Castlevania, Punch-Out, and Mega Man. Yeah, no big deal. If that wasn't crazy enough for you, it was also the year of Princess Bride, Predator, Lethal Weapon, RoboCop, the Ninja Turtles cartoon. Okay, we just need to start discussing this right now.
Welcome back to the History of Awesome. This is 1987 edition. I'm David Hatfield. I'll be your host. This time out, I'm joined by Chris Carl, Jose Otero, Sam Claiborne.
87.
This 87 is a kind of a supersized year. This may be the biggest year we've covered yet so far. There's a lot of ground to cover. Why don't we start with this little indie game called The Legend of Zelda.
Indie game?
Tiny.
Yeah, tiny game, right?
It came out in the US in 87, but surprisingly it lagged behind Japan by about 2 years, which is crazy.
Yeah, well, it was designed to be a launch game for the Famicom Disk System.
Yep, a peripheral we never got that was rewritable media, like floppy disk size. It was yellow. It had the discs were yellow. They had Nintendo emblazoned on them.
You could go to the gas station and stick in a floppy disk and get a new game on it.
We didn't want that anyway.
I know.
We didn't want that anyway.
It was kind of silly because then you wouldn't have a gold cartridge, right?
Right.
Which is the coolest thing ever.
Gold cartridge.
Yeah.
That was the holy grail, right?
It was really all I cared about when I first saw Zelda. I saw it in the store and I was like, it has a little window in the box so you can see the gold cartridge, and that blew my mind.
Who was behind that?
I mean, Nintendo
of America marketers.
So that was brilliant marketing.
Yeah, in Japan, like gold is not associated that closely to Zelda. I mean, sure, the limited edition systems will have like gold trims, but most of the boxes are green. Like they have, especially for the old games. Like,
well, no, they have all kinds of color boxes there. Yeah. But did you guys play Legend of Zelda back in the day?
Oh yeah.
And Chris, you?
I did a lot of sitting there and watching my friend play through it when he wouldn't share.
Because I think, Jose, you didn't play it until more recently, right?
No, I absolutely played played a ton of the original.
It was Brian Altano.
I only beat it recently. Like, so I watched my friend play it, and then I played it as an adult. I only played it like completely all the way through the first time a couple of years ago.
Me too.
And it's a very, very deep game for that system.
That's amazing.
Like even for now, there's a lot of stuff that, I mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff that
it doesn't let on
influence.
anything, right?
No.
Like there's the set of clues in the game don't help you. The playground and talking about it outside of playing the game helps you. And Nintendo Power.
Nintendo Power. Yeah, that was
the fold-out map is in the first issue. Yeah. That wasn't until '88 though.
When that came out.
Yeah, that issue came out. So
it came out. The game was released in August 22nd, so it was the back half of the year in '87.
But you needed the map by then. And actually, it was a second quest map. But there was lots of game help for it. I have like a generic Zelda book, but my favorite thing is I buy a lot of NES games, and I'm a collector, and so I get I have multiple copies of Zelda. And I always pick it up because in the box, in the notes section, or with it, there's always like somebody's parents' like maps that they help them draw, or the kid themselves. It's mainly like something that looks a lot nicer. And then it's like, and I've been to people's houses before. They're like, yeah, this is the maps my mom made for Zelda and stuff like that. I always thought that was really cool.
The gold cartridge was a big draw, obviously, like just physically looking at it. But then when you actually played that game, and the fact that most every game I feel, at least I played as a kid, unfolded through levels. They unfolded through, okay, now this is World 1, 2, this is 1, 3. Like they went in a sequence, whereas this, everything was spread out, and you were finding dungeons, and you were finding secrets, and you were really sort of invested in this world. And then years later to learn that Miyamoto based a lot of that core game design, the idea of the exploration, on like his childhood experience, exploring, the hills in Kyoto. Like that was pretty touching stuff when I found out. I was just like, wow, this is so personal, versus so many other games.
I like how they call the dungeons levels anyway.
They do, yeah, absolutely.
Really
but it was still sort of scattered and spread through an overworld. Like that was so smart.
I think you had to do that at the time because people didn't understand anything different. They're like, okay, level, this is where I go next.
This is a very early example of open world game design.
Yes, absolutely.
You could freely wander everywhere you wanted to in the overworld. You kind of have some freedom with how you tackle dungeons. It's not totally up to you.
Yeah, you're somewhat limited by your tool set.
Yeah.
But then you're mainly limited by how many hearts you have.
Yes.
Yeah. Because if you try to go to if you range outside where you should, you just get hammered.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's tough to just be an expert at that game. It's like you need to be able to absorb some damage later on.
That was frustrating when I was a kid. Is that the short sword stroke? It has a really, really steep learning curve, I think, although you get more powerful.
And lining it up,
and I didn't understand that. I was always really frustrated by Zelda. Unlike you, only beat it very recently. With Brian Altano's help, because he memorized every single bush you can burn, wall you can bomb, or anything. I'd come in and be like, Brian, I need more hearts. He's like, did you get this one? Did you get this one? Did you get this one? He has it all up here. He says he plays it yearly.
It's amazing how many sequence breaks were already there in that game. And it's also interesting to point out that I feel like America did have an intro to that style of game, not so much in text adventures, but definitely in Adventure, which was a game I didn't play for the Atari, but Nintendo, you know, history is unclear if Nintendo saw that and then said, hey, we're going to improve on this or not, but they definitely did, regardless. Like visually much better. It was a lot easier to sort of understand the tools you had to work with.
Warren Robinette, who made Adventure, said he based that entirely on Colossal Cave Adventure.
That's right.
The text game, and in fact, it's almost room for room was originally set up to be like Colossal Cave Adventure. So there's a rich tradition of adventure games becoming slowly graphical adventures. It's really neat. It's kind of sad that Zelda's kind of gone away from that adventure type game, and that it's become more you know, linear and sequenced.
Exactly, narrative focus has definitely picked up in a lot of them, and I feel like, you know,
narrative. That's right.
You know, it's interesting to see if they will recapture that idea, but they got it so right the first time.
It feels like everybody clamors for narrative when in a game like Zelda, I don't feel like you absolutely need it. It is the pure exploration and adventure of that game. Do you guys remember that commercial?
That's what I want to say. You said your first encounter with Zelda was the cold cartridge at the store, but my first encounter was that commercial.
Octorocks!
Yeah, it was so.
Wait, is that it's not the rap one with the girl that's playing Link. That's for Link to the Past.
No, it was some comedian from the time.
Oh,
and he's like dressed all in black, wandering around these black rooms, shouting for Zelda, and then shouting out the names of the enemies and making these strange noises. It's really bizarre.
It's bizarre, but it's like that game, more than anything, that I was like, what is an Octorok? Like, I really wanted to know.
They also showed footage from the game, and I had a Nintendo at the time, and I was like, oh, this looks interesting. I gotta check out this game.
Yeah. And then the narrative does, I mean, it's to your point about narratives and how some games don't need them, I will say the narrative to The Legend of Zelda, the original, becomes your experience playing it. Where it was like, hey, with this whistle, I blew it, and all of a sudden a hurricane, like a tornado came and took me somewhere else. And it became like stuff you told your friends about, either at school or on the playground. You'd hear like these things from either tip lines or from friends who'd say, hey, if you go here, do this thing, burn this specific bush, you'll find an entrance to a dungeon. And you're like, I can't wait to get home so I can check if this is real.
And then the rumors of the second quest, and then that turned out to be true. There's a whole, and that was because of a strange miscalculation in memory, that there was actually twice as much memory to use for dungeons. So there's more dungeon layouts than there were originally there. But yeah, the second quest, that was the coolest thing ever. It was such a huge game. It was just like, it's just massive. You know, like Super Mario Brothers is famous for being full of secrets, and this just took that to another level. And of course, it was sequentially the next game that Shigeru Miyamoto made. And like secrets.
That's why I wanted to point out. This is Miyamoto's follow-up to Super Mario Brothers, and he deliberately wanted to contrast it with the linearity of Mario Brothers, and that's why he designed it more of an open world game with lots more player choice.
Yeah, and the spirit of that game definitely lives on a lot today. Maybe not, I mean, obviously it still lives on in Zelda franchises as today, but definitely the Dark Souls games tap into, and the Demon Souls, the From Software, those adventure games do tie or into that feeling of, you know, mystery and unknown. Now, to be fair though, those games intentionally make their design very vague, so you're not sure what each item will have an effect on or how you're supposed to level. I feel like Zelda didn't really do that, but just the feeling of exploring this like hostile world and not really being sure where it's going to take you. I think the From games absolutely.
I think we had more tolerance for that back then too. I remember renting every NES game. I would just go through the store and rent them every week. You know, on the weekend my parents would get a movie, but I would go get a game, and it'd be at like the supermarket or something. And when you get Zelda, it was equivalent to me in quality to like Milan's Secret Castle. Like I didn't really know, like those are like two impenetrably difficult games to figure out. And one of them is actually going to be remembered fondly. There's no IGN to tell me that kind of thing back then.
Right. Yeah.
Zelda was the first NES game to sell over 1 million copies. Went on to sell 6.5 million.
How is that possible? Because like Duck Hunt and Super Mario Brothers were packed in. So maybe it was on a standalone?
Yeah, maybe they're talking about not including bundles.
Yeah.
But it established the action-adventure genre. I want to ask you guys this. Do you think Zelda helped legitimize console gaming in the eyes of PC gamers at the time?
PC gamers were already in their own world. There was so much out. King's Quest came out the next year. It was like such a big time for PC gaming. And I think like it was a difference between adults and kids. I don't think a lot of adults got into NESs, but a lot of adults like had, you know, or even in college, like had computers and stuff. So maybe it legitimized Zelda to, you a little bit legitimize Nintendo to a little bit older crowd.
I'm not sure that PC gamers still feel that
I know.
consoles are legitimate. So I mean, I think it brought some people over, but I always got the sense at that time that they were different worlds completely. Like I would play my computer or I'd go play my NES, and even I, as a child, was like, this is more of a toy.
Yeah. And it was always the same differences, right? Hardware was superior, sound was superior, like on the PC side versus what console was doing. I will say, like, I didn't grow up a PC gamer, but I would be surprised if folks did kind of look down their nose at Zelda, only because of how deep and complex that world was and how it tapped into a style of action-adventure, a genre that I don't think was very, like, it basically made that very popular, you know, despite how sort of open and how difficult that adventure could be.
Yeah.
That same month, August 1987, Metroid came out.
Unbelievable.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah, and Kid Icarus was around that time too. I think those like launched at the same time.
Embarrassment of riches.
But Metroid is another game for me, at least. Like I got it when I rented it when I was a kid, and like I played it, but it was really, really hard to figure out. And I love for that one though that Nintendo Power had codes in their classified information section that really helped. There's Justin Bailey. And I can't remember the other ones.
I feel like that that is something that's completely lost to the world. I mean, I guess it's like it's now on the internet, but that sense of just things spreading slowly between your friends, kind of like Street Fighter 2, where you found out about secret moves and stuff like that, and it was only shared through, like you said, tip lines and like just on the playground comparing notes. Like, do you have this? Do you have this? Metroid was another one of those where I was like mainly a bystander until like later in life, because I didn't have an NES at home. My friends all had them. My parents got me a 7800. Oh, sad story. I'll tell it later.
There were lots of good games with 7800. That was actually
I love the system.
Totally legitimate system.
But I didn't get an NES until later. And so things like Metroid, I was always like, it was just a watching kind of experience.
You go to a friend's house and watch it.
It's an interesting way to experience it, though, because you watch somebody go through this. It's not even a story. It's like, I'm just going to explore around and hope for the best.
And you can direct them. You can be like, you should do this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, and visually, it was absolutely the opposite, where Zelda is the Hyrule fantasy, right, fantasy setting, and then Metroid is sort of this dark sci-fi space, you know, alone. But they both explored the same concept, and that it was a world you had to explore and find secrets and find power-ups and use those to gain access to different places, to fight bosses. I will say that it's interesting to me because, you know, Miyamoto's influence on Zelda will always be remembered, but Metroid never really got tied to, at least early Metroid, didn't get tied to any one creator, even though, you know, important people like Gunpei Yokoi were involved in that. That was, yes, and Sakamoto, I think, is listed as an artist on that game. But just in terms of, like, it wasn't someone as prominent as Miyamoto, but in a lot of ways, Metroid was still playing with a lot of cool ideas. Some of them it executed really well. Some you can say it didn't quite as well.
Yeah.
But definitely a special game.
It was one of the first games to feature a female protagonist, even though it kind of seems like Nintendo of America didn't even realize that, because the instruction manual refers to Samus as he multiple times.
Well, and if you think about that, and then you think about the Chozo statues, which weren't really called that at the time, and then everything about the game is just Alien. They just made a game based on Alien that's really good and captures what Alien is like about being alone and frightened.
Even the self-destruct escape sequence at the end is from Alien.
And when you play that game, you can you can really see what you need, what tweaks needed to be made to make that game like super universally accessible and more popular. And one of them that always drives me crazy is that when you put in your code and you come back to the game, you have to refill your life bar.
Yeah.
So you have to go to a little crater spitting out enemies and just shoot them over and over and over and over and over.
I feel like that there was such a high tolerance for those kinds of activities in early games.
Totally.
Where like if you put that dynamic in a game now, people would be like, "This is broken. This is horrible. I would never, you never want to do this." You just accepted it. You're like, "I'm going to rent this for however long I have, or buy it, and I'm going to sit here with just this game and figure it out."
Another game, you had to make maps. You just have to make them.
Or you got the official Nintendo Player's Guide. They had laid out all the maps for you.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The music, and say Zelda had like 4 great songs, and that was it.
But the music,
Metroid has less, I think, maybe 3, maybe 4, all amazing.
The music is incredible in Metroid. The composer Tanaka intentionally wanted to make no distinction between music and sound effects in the game. So like sometimes you're hearing sound effects that kind of sound musical, sometimes vice versa. And it's
like
also,
in the elevator.
So good. And then he also makes really cool use of silence, which was totally unheard of in
so cool. And you can hear
games of the
footsteps.
time.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
A very ambient game. And what's interesting about Hip Tanaka specifically is he wasn't, like where Koji Kondo went to music school, he was a trained musician before he got a job at Nintendo, and that's the guy responsible for the Super Mario Brothers theme, the Zelda themes that we all know and love. Hip Tanaka was, music was a hobby, and sound design was a hobby, but it wasn't really his core focus. And he turned around this amazing soundtrack. You go to some of the locations in Metroid, and those bits just get stuck in your head, those loops of really good 30 seconds of music.
And then he scored some of the most famous Nintendo games of the last 3 decades. I mean, he's still doing stuff.
Yeah, but it's interesting that they gave him the power to do that, and that was an R&D 1 game, which was a big deal at Nintendo, at least in that R&D 1 was behind. This was the part of Nintendo that was behind the toy making aspects of, and making the Game Boy and sort of figuring out the best uses of technology, the experiments, if you will, all came out of R&D 1.
Metroid, the word Metroid is apparently a combination of the words Metro and Android.
Yeah.
I don't get where Metroid
I don't either.
So not so much the cityscape.
Yeah.
It could be that, or it's probably just a cool word.
Yeah.
There's so much ambiguity about even where Donkey Kong and stuff came from. It's
that's true.
It's difficult to figure that stuff out.
Metroid's legacy is clear. Today, Metroidvania is a whole genre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is Castlevania out by this point too?
Castlevania is a game we're going to be talking about in just a little bit.
Yeah.
Came out the same year.
Oh, so much good stuff.
I know, it's insane.
87 was incredible.
Metroidvania is a portmanteau of... No, I'm just kidding.
You mentioned Kid Icarus earlier. Kid Icarus came out in July of '87.
Yeah, same teams crossed over on those games.
Yeah, I think so.
I believe so, yeah.
Kid Icarus is
It's not
really,
how games are made now.
No, it's Gunpei Yokoi also. And that was my, out of Zelda and Metroid, and Kid Icarus is the one I liked.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a really weird game.
Yeah.
Because it's got this Greek mythology
It's really
setting,
weird.
but there's a credit card in it, and there's these giant noses with arms and legs.
Game over screen, I'm finished.
There's
That's
a
angel
wizard
themed.
that turns you into an eggplant. It's so weird.
Which is such cool. Those are all good characters in Captain N, the Game Master, which hit shortly after that. But yeah, I really liked Kid Icarus. I liked how it was like a really vertical game that was hard, and then it became an exploration game in the dungeons.
Wasn't there a Metroid in that? There was also
There's a Metroid enemy.
Metroid-looking enemy in that as well.
Yeah.
I was so super bad at Kid Icarus. It was
Yeah,
one of those
well,
games.
It's a really hard game.
It was one of those games that I hated because I was so bad at it.
Yeah.
It was like I played it for a while too, and I
soon
would
as that Grim Reaper spots you.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty much.
And I
It
just
sends out all these little guys and they attack you. But yeah, it is deep
gave
and
up.
I totally understand why. The way to play that game again is to kind of have some codes on your side and get through. There's a reissue of it on 3DS, Kid Icarus Classics 3D, that made it so you could float a little bit by holding the jump button.
no, nice.
And it changes everything. Because that's the thing, right? If you're jumping to platform all the time, and it gets icy, and then you just fall, and you have to start way far down. So.
Yeah. I think that was the frustration, but it says something about you. That's your favorite of the
Well, yeah,
era.
so out of all these Nintendo games, Kid Icarus is not remembered as fondly as Zelda or Metroid. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's because it didn't have sequels, for one thing.
Yeah.
And then people
There
clamored
was
for the
one on Game
sequels
Boy
for years.
and then one on 3DS.
Yeah, there was the Game Boy one was really neat. I think it's just because it's a weird theme, and Nintendo kind of tried to make people forget about it. I don't know if Angels were the easiest thing to get across to audiences. I don't know.
Yeah, Castlevania also came out that same year.
Oof.
Yeah, May 1st that year.
Yeah, again, some of the best music in any game ever, and that's one that sold me on the Nintendo. I remember going to my cousin's house and seeing this game, and I just felt like they were playing these ridiculous horror movie scenes out right there on screen. It was so visceral and beautiful and colorful.
Yeah.
I just loved everything about that game.
It's a more traditional linear side-scrolling game, but I thought the horror theme was unique for the time.
Totally.
Sure,
And if you think about it, we already talked about an alien game. There's a fantasy game,
Yeah.
an angel game. I don't know where that fits in. But everybody was making
Greek
games
mythology.
based on movies and popular culture, and that was one of them. Contra was another.
Castlevania was just I think from the horror perspective, like you were saying, that was the hook for me. More so than any of those other games, I thought that was the coolest element. Contra is very cool too. We'll get to that obviously, but Castlevania just so amazing. And I thought the whip was a unique weapon.
Oh,
the other thing about it to me, and I had a game like this for every console generation, I would be this is as good as graphics are ever gonna look. You know, did you have that for like literally for that? I was like, Castlevania is so good looking, and really, you know, you look at it now, you're like, what was that even? Was that a Medusa head?
Yeah. Oh man, those
turkey?
Medusa heads.
Well, I wonder if some of that comes from just like the original way we experience those games is on this smeared CRT screen, and they were programmed that way. They were displayed that way to everybody, and things look so different. And like now, I think I'm a big fan of like pixel art, and I like what it looks like, but that's not what games looked like then. And I wonder if that helped. I wonder if it helped those designs, because they were specifically designed not to look like square pixels, you know?
Yeah, you're right. The CRTs kind of made everything a little blurry. It looked a little bit more like almost 16-bit, even, you know, at that era. So yeah,
it was almost like a painting. I mean, everything blurred together a little bit more.
It's interesting that Super Mario Brothers came out years before and is known for having controls that just feel so good, so perfect. And Castlevania is much clunkier because you can't change your once you've jumped, you cannot change your directory.
Man, you can learn how to be good at it, though.
Well, it's just a lot more difficult.
And it made boss fights really difficult. Like, I'll never forget some of the boss fights in that game, from the Grim Reaper, which felt impossible at times, just because all those annoying like boomerangs were coming at you from all these different places, to even Frankenstein and Igor. Igor specifically being the biggest pain in the rear like you'd ever seen. But yeah, between the soundtrack and even like something as tiny as, or you can consider as trivial as a walk animation. Like Castlevania had one of the most detailed walk cycles I'd ever seen in a video game. So that also kind of blew my mind. Interestingly enough, I started with Castlevania 2, which was much more of an open world, like exploration style thing, very similar to Metroid. And then went back to play the first one and was like, oh my God, this is so different. But still enjoyed it.
I love how it pulls out and shows you the map of the castle you're exploring. And it shows you the areas you're going to be going to, and like you go up to the clock tower. And then you get to that bridge in one sequence. I think it's in level 4. And you look in the background, and there's Dracula's like little house, like on the end of the staircase.
Mega Man does that awesome similar thing where it shows you everything that you're gonna do, you know, and then you're like, I gotta get to this, or I can start certain levels, you know, or all the levels, I guess, in some cases.
Some of the side weapons in Castlevania are also really effective on bosses like Mega Man.
I love that both Metroid and Castlevania came out the same year, and now we think of them as, you know, so closely connected, those two games.
Especially because as sequels tried different experiments, they ended up kind of overlapping very often, where, you know, like Metroid started as an open exploration game and Castlevania eventually went there, but they both just took really cool ideas almost in tandem at times, and you'd be like, wow, this is, hence where, you know, the name Metroidvania came from.
Konami was killing it then too. I just remember like Konami put out Castlevania. They had so many great games at the time, like Jackal, and they just like had this box art, right? And it was like in Life Force and Gradius. It was the silver box.
Life Force,
and a picture in it. Yeah, I know.
So good.
But Konami was like a huge brand, and so was Capcom, and like you recognized their games and you knew they were going to be quality games. They weren't all quality games, but I still loved them. Bayou Billy.
I mean, speaking of Capcom and speaking of Mega Man, that also came out this year, the original Mega Man.
All these things blow my mind.
December 17th, simultaneous release in North America and Japan.
Wow, I bet nobody played Mega Man for a little while though, because
it was not the first
I had to go back and play Mega Man because Mega Man 2 was the thing that really took off.
So the first one was not a huge hit, but it spread kind of by word of mouth, and that's actually how I heard about it. And then Nintendo Power totally blew up Mega Man 2. And that was one. That's where the series
that pictorial and Nintendo Power for Mega Man 2 was one of the best ways that I've ever sold on a game, because it showed like those giant creatures that you fight, and they were so colorful. It looked like nothing on the NES before that. And it talked about how good it looked. Like the magazine was like, look how good this game looks. I think you said like graphics. They used the word graphics.
Well, so this was my first awareness of the concept of graphics, because my friends at school on the playground was like, you gotta check out this game, Mega Man. It has awesome graphics. And I was like, what are graphics?
What is this you say?
It's what you look at in the video game. You know, I was like, you're right. This game looks really cool.
I wonder what I would have even called them before
I've never even referred to it. I never thought about that.
What it looks like. I mean,
exactly.
I remember looking at the box art to that. And, you know, I would spend a lot of times, you know, just a lot of time at the supermarket in particular. That's where I rented all my NES games.
Here.
And I would sit there and just look at the wall of titles, and the box art sold me on certain things and deterred me on certain other things. And I think Mega Man had like this really weird, dorky art, and then you flip it over and you're like, oh, okay. yeah, this looks kind of cool.
It did no favors.
Did no favors, but then you took it home and you're like, this is awesome. Like it's maybe one of the times that works in reverse, where like the graphics in the game are actually better than what's being sold on the box.
I would love to know the story. Like, who made that art? Has the video game ever been more poorly represented than that original box art?
That guy.
This old man. His suit is yellow instead of blue. He's holding a gun with his hand instead of the arm cannon. Like
even Mega Man 2, he's still holding a gun. I think it's ridiculous. Maybe as a
Mega Man 2 box art is also bad.
It's also terrible. Because Mega Man is a really cool designed character, and in Japan they always used his amazing little manga look and stuff to advertise.
He has the manga anime look. You must have thought
he was rock and roll.
They were deliberately trying to avoid making it look like anime because they thought that would be a turnoff for North American audiences. Or something.
I always thought that was way cooler. I was like, put that all over. Yeah, they had no confidence at that time. I think it's changed, obviously.
Yeah. Capcom had been making arcade games for a while, and they'd ported their arcade games to the NES. But Mega Man was the first game that they made specifically for the NES.
That's so cool. And like that was the turning point. Like Nintendo was like, we're making our own games. We're not porting games. Nobody else is doing that. Nintendo ported a lot of games too. But yeah, it took a while for people to make dedicated games. Yeah, Capcom had Ghosts and Goblins and Gunsmoke and stuff like that before that. But
it's Mega Man is another example of non-linear game design. Like we see this happening over and over again.
Choose the level you go to.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's like 1987 was the year that the industry started letting gamers off the leash. Yeah, it's like okay, you're on your own now.
It's like having a level select code when you're a kid. You're like, well, at least if I have this for the weekend and I rented it from the local Hy-Vee, you get to like go to every single level and see all the game. It was like really meaningful.
The cool part about that too is, if you didn't have the right weapon for the boss, it's like if you're a really, really good player, you can get through Mega Man, get to the boss. But if you don't have the right weapon to face off against that boss, you're going to be shooting him with I called them eggs when I was a kid. You're shooting them with the eggs. It wasn't eggs, obviously.
Well, and in Mega Man 1, they have the different pellets that you pick up for life.
Right.
Like they standardized what Mega Man stuff looked like after that. In that game, there are even different life pellets that look like eggs.
But even the concept of like there's a certain boss order to travel through the whole game, and it would be much easier if you went about it this way.
It's the developers wanted to use rock paper scissors design, where one item is always most useful against another item.
And it's the idea that they kept
how satisfying is that when you go to that boss with the right weapon and you shoot him like 3 times, it feels so good.
Versus when you shoot him with the wrong weapon and you're there for like 10 minutes. Like,
every single boss, hop, 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 just firing constantly and hopping.
I think the other like little tiny detail that's like that made me excited about the game. Probably I'm the only one. I love the little door coming up, like click, 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 and then Mega Man like
you always
going
have to,
across the screen.
You have to jump so that you stay in midair as the scene goes by.
Maybe I'm not the only one because you see a lot of art like that. Oh man,
Mega Man had a great jump.
He did.
Just in general, his arms are out in the air. It's so funny. Like, nobody jumps that way. It's great. He's like, ah!
He looks like a crazy possum or something.
I never thought about that. Who's your favorite boss for the first Mega Man? I always like Bomb Man because he had a mohawk.
Bomb Man was awesome.
Bomb Man was cool. Guts Man was the hardest level. So that's the one that
I like the name Guts Man the best, right? Like Guts Man. I don't know what that even meant.
I don't know what it meant in hindsight either. Like, was it because he's strong? Maybe it's because he's strong.
It would have been so cool if he was like throwing organs at you. That would have
been
he
wasn't guts
better.
Like,
but there wasn't guts.
No.
Him.
It was construction themed.
Yeah, right. I know.
Guts in the building.
Man.
I don't know.
Yeah, and then the ice man in that game is great too. Iceman. He has a little Eskimo thing.
Yeah, he looks like an ice climber. He's one step removed.
Yeah, he's great.
That's actually
absolutely.
True. Jose, favorite boss?
I'm gonna go with Guts Man as well. Like I just thought it sounded cool. It didn't make sense, but it didn't have to make sense when you were a kid. Yeah, he had that big defining jaw. That's a good point.
Speaking of strong jaws, in October of '87, Mike Tyson's Punch Out was released.
Weak Jaws. I thought you were gonna go with the Jaws Nintendo game.
Well, that's Weak Jaws.
I love that game.
Well, Mike Tyson's Punch Out also has Weak Jaws with Glass Joe.
Yeah, the first opponent, first guy goes down.
And King Hippo is a weak tummy.
Yeah, it's true.
He's got a Band-Aid on it.
That game was for older kids when I was a kid, and I was scared of it.
Scared of it?
Yeah.
Wow, I loved that game.
Yeah, I love the challenge of it.
I mean, I love it now.
Yeah. It's like, so it's a port of 2 arcade games, Punch Out and Super Punch Out. And they sort of combined them and combined the bosses.
It has some of the characters, but it's nothing like that game.
It's a totally different perspective.
Better and it looks worse.
I think it's a better game.
Beautiful, but it's a better game.
I love Mike Tyson's Punch Out. It's kind of the original boss rush mode. Like that's all the game is.
Yeah.
And kind of a puzzle game too, right?
It's totally a puzzle game.
It's almost like a rhythm game, actually.
Yeah, or a rhythm game. Yeah. Just the concept for that game as a boxing game is like so out of Like what a creative, amazing masterpiece of gameplay. Just like this is a way that you play this fast-paced, really difficult puzzle game. So cool.
And one of the first smart uses of Mario that was outside of Super Mario Brothers. In terms of making him a referee and show up, the cameo approach.
We were talking about this yesterday. Is he actually supposed to be Mario, or is he just there? Like, do they actually, does the manual ever refer to him as Ref Mario or anything?
I don't know.
Is he just an
I
Easter
think
egg?
Donkey Kong's in the audience.
He's in the audience.
I'm pretty sure
So,
it's
yeah,
Miyamoto
it's gotta
approved.
be.
I think I've seen at least that much. But you know, just the idea that you would see Nintendo characters pop up in other places. That's the first example I think I
Special
could
chip
ever
in that
remember
game
of
that
it.
made it so you could have giant sprites.
Yep.
And that was the advantage of the NES here was that they upgraded the hardware on the cartridge itself in many different iterations. But in Japan, when they had the disc system, they couldn't really do that. So cartridge games later that came out in Japan used the American style of doing things. They dropped the disc system for some stuff. So for Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, that came out here first. Like that was not a Japanese-made game, and it was ported there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously.
I mean, it's a Japanese game. It was made for Japanese audiences. Yeah. So then when they ported it there, they actually put it in a gold cartridge because Zelda came out in a lame cartridge there, and they wanted to make up for it.
And it was kind of I don't know, for any kid growing up in the 80s, like looking at this game where you have this tiny little boxer, Little Mac, like fighting these massive characters and him dropping them. Like, I don't know, that was kind of a feel-good angle I feel for any kid, right? Like just overcoming, you know, the big bad boss. Some of those guys were brutal. Like who can forget Bald Bull and the three, you know,
the
charge.
second time you play all those guys, it's so difficult. Did anybody here ever beat Mike Tyson?
I didn't even get to the second time.
I did finally beat Mike Tyson.
You did?
Yeah,
oh, that's cool.
They made a whole song about it.
Yeah, Fresh Prince did.
But I would say Mike Tyson was all over the public consciousness at that time. You know, even showing up in like Street Fighter
really big deal,
as well, he was originally
Well, it was Balrog in Japan.
Yeah.
But, no,
he was called M. Bison in Japan,
yes,
and then they
Balrog
swapped
here.
those names. So M. Bison was actually Mike Tyson. That's why Balrog looks. He doesn't really look that much like Mike Tyson for me, but he was all over video games at that time, and what a like ego stroke for Mike Tyson, man.
It came with a little letter from Mike Tyson to you, the video game.
Yeah. Well, and on the cover it had like his signature. Like they really did play that up as something that was pretty cool. And he was a brutal boss, man. He was that was the first game that I memorized the password to get to him. It was like 007373593. Like I'm like that is forever in my brain for the rest of my life.
My friends used to always be able to recite that too.
When the license expired, they re-released it as just Punch-Out, and then Mr. Dream replaced Mike Tyson.
And he was the same boss, essentially, just with a different skin.
just a different skin.
Yeah.
Not as cool.
No, not
nearly as cool.
And that's a game that you will never get to play that game in an official way ever again, which is really sad.
Yeah, it's too bad. One more notable video game release in the arcades in 1997, Contra arrived.
Yeah, so this is our only chance to talk about Contra in History of Awesome because it came out on NES a little bit later.
Yeah.
But what a meaningful, amazing game with amazing music.
Yep.
What a year for that. And the arcade game, I mean, just briefly, it's a vertical monitor instead of horizontal, so there's a lot less to see, but it was still a co-op game about basically living the Aliens movie.
Well, yeah, totally influenced by Arnold Schwarzenegger and Stallone movies of the time. Aliens, Predator, Rambo, like all of this stuff thrown into one game.
Just running around with the muscles.
Every action movie and horror movie
everything.
and thriller had a game equivalent at this time. It was so cool.
Yeah, and it didn't have to be that license, which was nice. You know, they were able to just kind of take some concepts and weave them in. And this game did just a really wonderful job, I think. I felt like this was one of the most perfectly balanced games that there was. It was
Dirty
brutally,
Lives.
it was hard, but it was
the Konami code.
Yeah, it was hard, but it was fair. And once you memorized your patterns, like you could get good at this game.
And with a friend, you were better at it. Like
for sure.
It was one of very few co-op games at the time. And it was so satisfying to play with a friend. And if you guys both knew what was going on, like, you stay up there. I'm going to take the lower route.
Yeah. But whether or not it was an oversight or if this was intentional, you can totally kill your friend in the levels that are like vertically scrolling. Because if you go past them and like they get cut off at the bottom, they just die.
You can also take your friend's spread weapon when he called it.
Yeah.
Kill you for that.
I think you can also take their lives. Like if you're out of lives and he still has lives left, you can take the lives.
Absolutely.
And it's a brutal dynamic. The game is like it's very cutthroat in many ways, and some of the boss fights in that were really just awesome. I mean, it's basically like
there's
hitting
an evil
points,
computer
with
glowing buttons that shoots bubbles at you. So it starts out with a side-scrolling level, and then you're going to the screen, which
Yeah.
is remarkably
Pseudo
cool for the
3D,
time.
yeah.
Right.
And then you're at a vertical level. The waterfall music was my favorite too.
Really?
Yeah.
I really like that. But I like how they just switched up the levels so much.
Yeah, and it felt different. It felt like you were kind of getting like different games in one, 3 games in one, and a co-op game, which is so sort of sought after at the time.
Yeah, and it was just a weird setup too. It's like you're commandos on an island full of aliens.
Yeah.
Really cool.
So much of that stuff is
And you
predicated
blow it up
on
in the
money.
end.
Yeah.
Right? Like the fact that it was co-op in the first place is purely so both people have to put their quarters in that arcade
Yeah.
machine.
Well,
That was a rough
But it's
era
like
in the arcade for quarter munching.
Absolutely. But
Because people didn't want to play like games of skill anymore. They're just like, just get to the end of the game. I'll just put in $10 now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Like if you just pay enough money, you can get to the end of
Yeah,
this
Golden
game.
Axe at the same time.
exactly.
Simpsons is right after.
All right, transitioning over to the movie side of things.
ba-ba-ba.
1987.
As if there weren't enough
I know.
big events in this year.
The Princess Bride came out in 1987. I remember seeing it in theaters that year. My grandpa took my sister and I. I love that this game, this movie's genre is romantic comedy, fantasy, adventure. There aren't too many of those.
Got a lot of
course.
yeah.
So this movie is notable for being very quotable,
Yeah.
right?
Did you read the book before seeing it?
No, so I had no.
I went back
preconception.
and read the book after loving the movie when I was a kid. And it was a really good book to read when you're young too. It's set up with the same frame, you know, where it's like it's about a book.
Right, it's like the same framing mechanism exists. Yeah, it's such a just. I think it's one of those what you would call now. Like I don't think they were thinking about it in this way at the time. It's like one of those movies that hits 4 quadrants. You know, it's like everybody would see this movie, and you know, I don't know, like it. It's not like it set any box office records, but
No, it
it
was
definitely
like-
appeals across the board.
I think it was a modest success at the time, but it had legs, and over time, you know, on video, on TV, more and more people saw it. It became a cult favorite movie.
Yeah.
The game that Fred Savage is playing in it, Hardball.
I've always wanted to know what that game was.
Dude, I used to play. I used to have that game on my Tandy.
Yeah,
and I used to play that game so much. And when I saw that, this was also the era where I guess a little bit earlier, you start seeing video games in movies.
Totally.
Made me relate to those characters more.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah,
Totally.
that guy's like me. He's playing hardball on his computer.
I can tell you, the Google search for what game is Fred Savage playing in Princess Bride does not yield an answer.
Oh,
So that's
really?
good to know, yeah.
Yeah, hardball. Hardball
Glad to be
it
of
is.
service.
Yeah.
Rodents of unusual size is my favorite part about that movie. I love that. That's just that. I guess it's like a dog in a costume. I don't know what it is. It looks great. It looks ridiculous. And then there's fire coming up all around it.
Yeah.
So there's like cool effects in that. And then Andre the Giant is so awesome.
Yeah, so
So
it's an
good.
awesome cast. Fred Savage, Carrie Elways, Robin Wright, Mandy Patinkin, Andre the Giant, Christopher Guest, Billy Crystal, Peter Falk. Incredible cast for a movie.
I love Christopher Guest in this movie. He's so like hateable.
Who's Christopher Guest in it?
He's
The Six Fingered
yeah.
Oh, really? He's so
Yes.
like dressed up. That's
Yeah.
right around the time of Spinal Tap too.
He's so awesome in that movie.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like little sleeper moments in that movie, and I think it kind of adds up to this just sort of brilliant
Yeah.
film that has lasted forever.
As You Wish, Inconceivable.
Does anybody want a
Inconceivable.
peanut?
Yes,
My name is Enrico Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
And it's weird now. You see Mandy Patinkin, you
Yeah,
know, like in
Homeland.
Homeland,
Yeah.
and you're like, I'm like, it's Inigo Montoya. You killed his father. You better prepare to die, man.
Siskel and Ebert gave The Princess Bride 2 thumbs up.
Of course.
good taste.
Yeah.
It's like 90% of movies.
No, it wasn't. I watched at the movies all the time when I was a kid.
No, they rarely agreed.
They savaged a lot of things that I really liked.
Yeah.
So
A movie that Ebert liked, I don't know about Siskel. Another one from '87 was RoboCop.
Wow. Now, there was a
I
movie
watch
with things to
RoboCop
say.
almost yearly.
yes.
I learn something new every time I watch it. It's a wonderful movie that did not
Incredible.
deserve a remake.
No, I mean, not that. I mean,
Like you're saying deserve, like deserve.
Oh, sorry, it did not earn. I don't know.
It did not
It
need
should've-
one. It's
does
maybe
not need one, yeah.
Should not have gotten a remake.
Yeah.
Directed by Paul Verhoeven. It was his first major Hollywood movie. I think he's from
He
Denmark.
made a bunch of Scandinavian
Yeah.
movies with Rutger Hauer.
Yep.
Back in the day,
He
and
actually originally wanted Rutger Hauer to play RoboCop. They convinced him to
how
go
would that
with
have
Peter
worked?
Weller instead.
I think Rutger Hauer would have worked similar to how he worked in Blade Runner, as an android. But I think in this, Peter Weller's, I don't want to say like weird face, especially weird face when you like kind of pulled like all the hair off of it.
How the
He just
makeup
looks
goes
strange.
a little bit wide. And
Yeah,
he looks like
it almost
he has
looked
a
like
tiny
Brazil
face
or something.
Yeah.
Totally.
That movie will always stand out for me because I'll never forget the first time I seen it. Like, it was very dark in tone, but like, if you think about it, Empire Strikes Back is a dark movie, but it didn't feel tonally as dark in any way, shape, or form
it's like,
as RoboCop.
There's
It's
like
ultra-violent.
ultra-violent, but also this black humor.
Yes,
too.
Yeah,
all over
totally.
the place.
Yeah.
And I had never seen something like that as a kid. Even the scene where Peter Weller's character is, sort of the moment when he gets shot up and they set that up as his
Shotgun in his
transformation.
hand.
Oh, it was just, it was
Yeah.
brutal.
That's
And I'm a
horrible.
kid in
When
the
he
80s.
bone
Like,
and stuff
what is
When
this
Boddicker
movie?
gets hit by the car after
Yes. In the
That is my favorite thing that happens in a movie.
ever all movies.
It's like so amazing.
that's how I
it
learned.
sloshes up the screen.
That's how I learned what toxic waste is. I had to ask my dad what happened to him. Well, he fell into toxic waste.
Well, and there's no
Oh yeah,
such
that in the 80s that was like a thing that could
Yeah,
happen to you in any
there's
movie.
no toxic waste for us to like have mutants come from these days. I mean,
Well,
Ninja Turtles came from that.
Let's bring it back,
Totally. Toxic
Robo-
Avenger?
I remember the first time I ever heard about RoboCop, I was visiting my aunt, and she's like, she had kind of seemed like straight-laced to me at the time, like prior to this,
Yeah.
and then we're all at dinner, and she's talking about RoboCop and how much she likes it, and I'm like, I think I like my aunt a lot more now. But I hadn't seen it, and I didn't see it until a couple years later. I saw it in junior high, like snuck it at a friend's house or something. I wasn't allowed to see R-rated movies when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So
It was a conversation for me.
when I watched it, it was like super taboo. Like I felt like it was like that for most of my friends too. Like the violence in it was really, really aggressive, and like kids were all like,
There's nudity.
there's nudity.
Locker
There's
scene in the
one
beginning.
half second of nudity, and there's just lots of violence, lots of swearing. The whole Ed 209 sequence was just really brutal at the time.
That's where
right.
it kills the boardroom?
Yeah,
or just one. He shoots up one guy with like.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah.
he just doesn't stop.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Yeah. So good. I mean, it shoots the rapist in the crotch. I mean, it's all. There's so many,
yeah.
so many sequences in that movie that are just like super, super gory. But there's also this like awesome social commentary going on in that
it's like-
movie.
they're talking about. They're addressing
Or Detroit.
gentrification, political corruption, corporate greed, corporate privatization.
The
like-
ads between
yeah.
them is all about
Media influence.
doing that. That was really clever.
It's Verhoeven kind of at
do you
his
feel?
best in that way because I think he's done other movies that are good in different ways. Like he did Starship Troopers, but that was like a shadow of like I feel like he was way more deft with the way he did RoboCop.
Yeah.
Starship Troopers I still love, but it's like kind of hits you over the head with the message a little more.
for sure.
Absolutely.
The original cut of RoboCop got an X rating.
Hell yeah.
They had to go back to the MPAA with 11 different versions before
So
they could get it down
that
to
blows
R.
my mind because my earliest memories of RoboCop are watching toy commercials for kids.
And there was a cartoon
for
too.
RoboCop.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like this, like I remember specifically, it was one of those commercials where it's like the kids have extra stuff they're playing with that they don't sell, and I think they had a bunch of like maybe like lens canisters or blocks, and like RoboCop's car like bashes through them, and it looks all cool.
Yeah.
Man, when toy commercials were like the stuff that you would never have around your house.
Yeah,
you
like
know,
a waterfall, like
Yeah,
a tiny waterfall.
They set it all up, and you're like, I could never make my toys look this cool ever.
They're like in a backyard with like a huge Sarlacc pit or something.
Yeah, I hate those people.
Yeah, they might not even be able to do that today. Make children's toys for an R-rated movie, like market
Yeah.
children's toys for an R-rated movie. They might.
I don't
not
think
even be
they
allowed to do that
would
today.
But no, by RoboCop 3, it was like PG-13, I think.
Yeah,
And he turned
it
blue.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't even Peter Weller for RoboCop 3.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
So not
That
good.
jetpack scene. Ugh.
I actually like RoboCop 2.
That's
even
Frank
though-
Miller.
Me
I
too.
know, that's Frank Miller.
Yeah.
That one's like
There.
maybe even darker than the
The
first.
fact that it
one.
has a child protagonist that like abuses a
child
woman the whole time,
Antagonist,
I mean that abuses a
who
woman.
gets killed.
Crazy.
Like also, like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
it's
Nuts.
hardcore
Nuts.
movie. Frank Miller is a dark dude.
A lot of drugs. Yeah.
No kidding.
In 1987, Predator came out.
Which is funny because I didn't think that'd be the influence on Contra, but no, we had to wait.
Oh,
for
yeah.
a good Predator.
We said that
game.
before, too.
Oh, yeah.
But
Well, I guess that was it.
well,
it's just aliens.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
But it's in the jungle though, so.
But Rambo's in the jungle.
Commando.
Yeah, that's the like
Commando.
Commando too. With
Yeah.
his,
Man,
yeah.
the Predator.
Predator is so good, directed by John McTiernan, who I think the very next year would direct Die Hard. We'll be talking about that in the next edition of The History of Awesome. Directed
mean-
Die Hard with a Vengeance and Hunt for Red October.
that's a couple good years if you direct Predator and Die Hard back to back.
He would also go on to serve time in prison.
Yeah, but you know,
Oh no.
he gave us Predator and Die Hard
Yeah.
first.
And there was 2 governors in Predator.
Yeah, two future governors.
Jesse Ventura and
Schwarzenegger
Arnold
and Jesse
Schwarzenegger.
Ventura. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, they had Jesse Ventura. They had Carl Weathers.
I love Carl Weathers so
Bill
much.
Duke, who was also in Commando, is awesome in Predator, and then also had Shane Black, who wrote Lethal Weapon, who we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, and then would go on to direct Iron Man 3. It's insane.
Wow. I love the mud.
Yeah.
I mean, like they knew the Predator could see in heat vision, which is a great effect. The whole movie. When you see it now, it looks really janky, actually.
Think so?
But no, I mean, like in a cool way.
When he
Like
picks up
it
the
looks like it's a
scorpion.
computerized effect that the Predator's looking through, not his natural vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
hers. I don't know if it's a lady Predator.
Who knows?
And
I think it's a dude, actually, because
Really?
I think later on in the Predator lore, you get a look at the female. I'm just going to say that. I don't know. I think so. Let's just move on.
but I love, at the end, covering himself in mud. It's just like such a great scene.
Yeah.
That-
So Predator starts out as an action movie and then turns into like a horror sci-fi.
Totally feels
Absolutely.
like a horror movie.
Yeah.
I love that they set the whole thing up like it was one of those movies at the time. It's a Shane Black thing to kind of like, kind of move between genres like that. But he kind of sets the movie up like you're going to see another Commando or something. I mean, obviously the marketing for the movie was pushing Predator hard, but when you sit down in the seat, you're like, what's this about? What's this about? You don't see the Predator for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also love when the mask comes off. You get to actually see.
Gosh, what a great puppet or whatever it is.
Yeah, you get to see what the alien looked like, which I feel like when you first start watching the movie, you're like, oh, this is just what this thing looks like.
Yeah.
You get to see the face. It's
Yeah,
awesome.
the face is great. And then the nuclear device that he has that he sets off the mushroom cloud there. It doesn't laugh.
I feel like that movie, I mean, there are so many movies from just around this time that have informed action movies until now.
Which is
like,
kind of sad
for like
because
30
I want to see some new
years.
stuff, but it's okay.
Yeah. Fun fact, Van Damme, Jean-Claude Van Damme, originally cast as Predator.
As the Predator.
Yeah.
What?
Well, that would have been a funnier mask reveal.
Yeah, that's true. Any video game today that any like shooter, third-person shooter video game today is probably going to have a sequence where you pick up a minigun and carry it around.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that all comes from Predator.
Where they clear out the forest.
Yeah, Jesse Ventura, that's his weapon.
Yeah. It doesn't work.
No, what do you mean?
But he gets it though, and it leaves a little bit of like glowing blood.
yeah. That's how they learn he has glowing blood.
I mean, you got to make the Predator stand up to a minigun, or what good is it?
Yeah. I like the three-pronged laser sight too.
Yep.
That was really iconic from that
Yep.
movie. People just blow up.
Predator also has an awesome soundtrack by Alan Silvestri, who was just off Back to the Future.
Crazy.
Another great soundtrack.
So
Absolutely.
good.
Predator enjoyed the second best opening weekend of 1987 after Beverly Hills Cop 2.
It was a summer flick.
Probably. Summer blockbuster.
Crazy.
But yeah, as we mentioned, Lethal Weapon also came out in 1987, written by Shane Black, directed by Richard Donner, who also did The Goonies.
Yep.
and
No,
Superman.
Superman.
Yeah.
So lots of
Just the original Superman, or did he do Superman 2?
He filmed
He
most
did
of
some
Superman
of
2. He
Superman
just
2.
got
Didn't he take his
kicked
name
off
off
the
it or
project.
something? Is that-
They did. They
Yeah.
put
So
Richard
they
Lester
were
on
filming them
instead.
together.
Yeah, that's right. Both movies
They were
were being
filming them
filmed at the same
together,
time.
and then that he kind of like left or quit, and then they finished it with some of his footage and some of.
Yeah, so he had big heated battles with the producers, the Salkinds. It went back and forth for a long
So
time.
he made a cut
but,
of the movie eventually.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then there's a Donner cut of the movie.
Yes,
later.
there is a Donner cut of the movie, which has the original ending for the second movie. For folks who are interested, it was basically the ending they used for the first film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
they were
back
going to come
and
up with something else.
Watch the 1978 episode for more on that.
Lethal Weapon stars Mel Gibson, Danny Glover, and Gary Busey. Also, it starred Sam the dog and Burbank the cat as themselves.
Are those dogs
Those
and
are
cats? in the
super
movie?
important. Burbank the cat. I love that name for a cat, by the way.
Yeah.
That is a good
Lethal Weapon kind of, it made this buddy cop thing
Yeah.
huge.
It certainly wasn't the first buddy
Yeah.
cop movie. It wasn't even the first movie that pit like white guy, black guy together on the screen. But I think of it as a very iconic buddy cop movie.
It absolutely was, and essentially like you said, there were ones before it. It got the formula perfect, and obviously people were like clamoring for the sequel. It also made Mel Gibson a megastar.
Yeah.
And people
Yeah.
don't remember now, like he's had so many difficulties of late, but he was such a huge presence at the box office, and like this is what did it. It's not Road
Well,
Warrior.
he was doing Road Warrior. Then Thunderdome was right after that. Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, I think.
Is that 88?
And then
that
so.
late, really? I don't know for sure.
But this
But yeah.
He had a great American
was it.
accent. I'll give him that.
This was it. This is what launched Mel Gibson into the stratosphere. Danny Glover was pretty successful for a while as well, but like this is really Mel Gibson's vehicle, and you could see the Shane Blackness of it all. This is where you get some of that like really good sort of Shane Black dialogue, and he was all over movies in the '80s, like you said.
Monster Squad, hello.
Yeah.
Monster Squad is amazing.
They made 4 Lethal Weapons, but what's unique about the first one is they really captured how insane Mel Gibson's character Riggs is. Like he's supposed to be like a little off his rocker, and they really captured that in the first movie. And I think when they first show him, he's got like a gun in his mouth and he's contemplating suicide, and then he ends up not doing it. It's like, whoa.
Yeah, he's a much darker character to Danny Glover's like Family Man, and I feel like this was the first buddy cop movie I'd seen that really played up the differences between the two, not just in age, but and even in the way they sort of did their jobs, where Danny sort of out of breath, trying to keep up, and Riggs just absolutely doing like some karate kick, which this was back in the '80s when karate was like this foreign cool thing.
Yeah, they had that great fight scene at the end with him and Gary Busey in the, it's not rain, but like fire hydrant is erupting, so the water's showering around them, and they're using these like weird martial arts.
He's got the hair. The hair is always flapping around. It's so good.
But then Gary Busey's not quite dead, and both Mel Gibson and Danny Glover have to shoot him at the same time.
You got to unload on Gary Busey. He's not going to stay down, Gary Busey. He will not.
Did this movie turn you guys off to drugs forever because of the intro?
Well, I mean, I already thought the drugs were pretty bad, but it was scary.
Everywhere we looked, the message was there. Arcades, television, like everything. Drugs are bad. Yes. Oh,
huge syringes.
Needles at people.
How about Star Wars: The Next Generation?
Star Trek.
Oh, I'm sorry, Star Trek: The Next Generation. I typed Star Wars.
So Damon is not a Star Trek guy. That's okay.
Well, I very much like
the original series, right?
Like in the movies, but I just didn't watch Next Generation. But all 3 of you guys did.
Yeah. And so you and I were talking about this earlier, but like this was the movie that my family all watched together. We like gather around and watch. Oh, sorry. I keep screwing this up.
We were just talking about
so much stuff. Yeah, no. I don't know what night it aired on, but I do remember even when it was syndicated, we would watch Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yeah, same with my family. I can remember actually anticipating this movie because I had watched, the original series. Did I say movie?
Yes, you did.
It's off the rails, people. This show, like, I had watched the original series with my family, like in reruns. I wasn't young enough or old enough to watch the.
Which was a little boring for me when I was a kid.
I loved it. I loved the original series, and so when we got to Next Generation. I was like, who are these new people and how can it be a Next Generation, all these things? And we watched Encounter at Farpoint. I can remember, I can specifically remember, the TV we were watching it on. We all huddled around in the living room and, I can actually picture the scene. And it was okay, the first episode, but...
The first season's kind of rough.
Really? That show picked up a lot of steam, and I think immediately I really liked Worf, and I liked Picard.
I liked the holodeck.
The holodeck was awesome.
Was such a good idea because they could be in any like spaceship setting all the time. They wouldn't have to go to a planet to like play out something. They could be. And some of the worst episodes are actually in the holodeck, like if they're in a casino or something. I don't like those. Well, it was just a really cool effect. And you always wonder, like they had like romance scenes and stuff in the holodeck, and it always really got you thinking about like. How does this work?
what you, Sam Claiborne, would do with a holodeck?
Well, and who cleans the holodeck? And what's going on with that?
Who cleans the holodeck?
But now I know that it's a combination of transporter technology and force field technology, so they can just kind of move matter around and stuff in it.
Isn't Next Generation where Patrick Stewart really became really well known?
Yeah, and he hasn't aged since, which is not a coincidence.
I mean, he was in like Excalibur and movies like that. Right. He's in all these old school movies. He'll pop up. He's in Dune. But this is where he became like Patrick Stewart that we know and love. Yeah. And there's such a huge. I would say among the Star Trek fan base, this is probably the most beloved series, actually.
Yeah. And the cast all aged together. And when you see like the later movies, like they're all aged. They have to kind of explain that for Data and a couple other people. But it's interesting. And then of course Worf went on to other series, and there's all these crossovers. And eventually there's these 3 Star Trek series. There was Voyager and Deep Space Nine and Next Generation, which are all taking place around the same times and have the same. They just kind of developed this giant Star Trek universe. And it was really sad once all those went away and there was just no Star Trek. Now we have the reboot movies and they're good, but like there's no universe to be explored and lived in right now.
Yeah, and that's probably what was most special about The Next Generation. So I wasn't a big Star Trek guy. Like it was Star Wars all the way, baby. Like that was it. But, The Next Generation was my first entry to it. And I will say it caught me up on a lot of things really quickly. Like, being a new cast, new adventures, new conflict, new alliances, like
The
Klingons and the Federation.
Yeah,
like
Klingons weren't that bad suddenly.
Yeah, and they just kind of took all those ideas and ran with it and went in their own direction. I thought it was really cool, and I stayed with it for a really long time, even went back and watched some of the original series just to kind of really try to understand Star Trek. And I felt like it worked on so many levels because it was that next generation, that next idea, next, all of that.
For me, it really, Next Generation really got interesting with the Borg. Like, that was where I was like 100% on board with it. I love the Borg, all that stuff.
Yeah, the Best of Both Worlds was a two-parter in which Picard gets absorbed into the Borg Collective, and it's remarkably good sci-fi.
Yeah.
Just not being good Star Trek, it's just great sci-fi. It's wonderful. And then he has, PTSD after that for, seasons. It's really, really good. Great
Do you guys remember, I don't know if it was, I don't think it was the first season, it may have been. They did this one special episode that was about this, creature that, invaded people's bodies. And it was, super gory, and they actually showed it later because it was so gory. Maybe this is a fever dream I had.
It aired later in the evening?
Yeah, they actually had to bump the show until a little bit later.
Well, there was the Tasha Yar Sleeps with Data episode.
I mean...
which was a sequel, or it was kind of a playoff on an original series episode called The Laughing Time, I think. But it's about, this gas, affects everybody in the ship, and they become, super party.
Super party?
Yeah. And they all party, and they all get drunk, they act drunk and stuff, and then you find out that Data is fully equipped. I think that's in the first season, too.
And then you find out that Data... All kinds of quotes just coming off of Sam today.
Definitely, there is something to be said, too, that things are still being discovered, I feel, about that show today. I feel like in the past year, I clicked on some video that was just highlighting the way Commander Riker sits.
Oh, my God.
And how he has
kicks his leg over.
He kicks his leg over every single thing.
It's because those
It's
stupid...
so strange.
Those outfits were basically unitards or whatever.
Yes.
So they would always hike up, and you don't want them hiking up.
That show is always talked about for predicting technology. They used little iPad-like things all the time.
Yep.
And of course, the original series had the flip phones.
Surface,
They had
everything.
Stuff like that, everything's surfaced.
Yeah.
And you can't really ever see what's on the computers because they kind of blur it out, but it's really close tech. What they didn't have, what always drives me crazy now, is they didn't have Wi-Fi. And so every time they need to talk to a computer or Data needs to, he just types really fast. Instead of just thinking at the computer.
Yeah, and in line with
They didn't predict Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and in line with the movies, it was another evolution on the Enterprise itself, which
Yeah.
was always cool to see,
Saucer set.
what they can do to it, right? Because from the original show to the movies when they changed it, to then the Next Generation, it changed a lot. It became a lot smoother curves and whatnot, but it looked really cool, and that pulled me in as well, as part of it.
It was CG. There was nothing on TV that was that CG-ified at the time.
true.
They budgeted
They also shot big models.
$1.3 million an episode, which sounds like a lot to me in
Yeah,
1987.
that's a lot, for sure.
Yeah, for
And if
87 for sure.
And really, I think of TNG as a 90s show. So I know it was out in 87, but that seems so early.
So yeah,
to
it
me.
ran for 7 seasons from 87 to 94.
Yeah. So yeah, it really pushed it to the 90s.
We are running very short on time. There's a couple more things I want to cover. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the cartoon.
What?
First debuted in 1987. It actually aired as a pilot miniseries in December of 87.
Wow,
and then
so really
the
late.
official show debuted in October of 88, almost a year later. But they wanted to start selling some toys. The toys went on sale summer of 88.
For me, the big thing with the cartoon was that it was a huge departure from what I had known from the comics.
Yeah, very, very different.
Got the first edition of the comic. I actually got that comic taken away from me when I was a kid because it was too violent.
By your parents?
By my
or-
parents. My parents
So they flip through the pages, and they're like, "Oh, look at all these weapons."
No, I was stupid. I tried to hide it because I was like, they're not gonna like this if they see me reading it.
Yeah, the comics are pretty dark and violent, and then the show is obviously very colorful, lighthearted.
Commercial.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But still had its own charm. I love the intro. Even though the song, most cartoons in the 80s had horrible intro songs, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles absolutely
Turtle
fell in
Power.
love with that.
Yeah. I'm surprised to learn how long it lasted. It lasted for 10 seasons, almost 10 years, from 87 to 96. 96, I graduated high school, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were still running. I had no idea.
I don't associate it almost with my era because I was, already in junior high, I think, in '87, and so it's more my brother's thing, because it was it skewed younger. But I watched a lot of it because he was watching it. It was it was kind of that thing that you can kind of appreciate because you put a little wall up between yourself and you're like, oh, that's for kids, but I'm gonna check it out.
Like Tiny Toons.
Yeah, exactly.
And another cartoon, DuckTales, debuted in 87.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was just the biggest DuckTales fan. So Disney started these afternoon cartoons around. Gummy Bears was a Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah.
And I loved Gummy Bears.
I did too.
And that came out before DuckTales, and then they went to DuckTales, and then they went to Rescue Rangers and Tailspin
and
stuff
Darkwing
like that. But DuckTales was the one that hit right, and Gummy Bears right in my time. Like those were my age. And then DuckTales, I think, spread a little bit older people watch DuckTales and other series. It's about adventure and treasure.
I love
it's
DuckTales.
So cool.
It's set in the Donald Duck universe.
Yeah, do you know what that means?
Universe?
He's an uncle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like Donald
He's
Duck,
a
Donald Duck
Navy
is joining
person?
the Navy.
Yeah.
So he's leaving his kids or his nephews with
Nephews.
Scrooge.
Yes.
So it's like Scrooge is the great uncle of Huey, Dewey, and Louie in DuckTales.
I love Duckburg. Everything about that city is so cool. And then he has the crazy safe he swims in.
The whole plot of every episode is that somebody is trying to steal Scrooge McDuck's money.
Or he wants a big, cool gem or something.
Yeah.
He wants more money.
Yeah, it's a totally superficial show.
Predicated 100% on greed.
Scrooge McDuck is trying to keep his stranglehold and remain the richest duck in the world.
Yep.
Yeah, well, the 80s were weird for
to
that. I mean, who could forget, like, do you remember that show, like, this is slightly off topic, but Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous?
Oh, for sure.
Remember that stuff?
Yeah.
Like, people were obsessed with, like, making money in the
Grey
80s.
Poupon commercials.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
need to bring back the Grey Poupon commercials, I think.
There's no good role models in that show, except for maybe Launchpad. He's a nice guy.
DuckTales, I want to say one last thing. That game was brilliant.
It led to the game, which
Led
is
to the
a couple
game.
years later. But,
One of the best NES games, one of the best games of all time.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, that wraps up the History of Awesome episode for 1987. Pretty awesome year.
It was amazingly awesome.
Yes.
The stuff we didn't talk about, we could do.
I know
there's
there's a ton more stuff that we've talked for an hour now about all the cool video games and movies and TV shows of 1987. Thank you for joining us for another episode. The next edition will be 1988. You can look forward to talks on Zelda 2, Super Mario Bros. 2, and Die Hard. That's all coming up next. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Sam. My name is Damon. Thank you for joining us here for the History of Awesome.
Go play Kid Icarus.